Thank you so much, Tom, for sharing with 500 of my closest friends that I don't know how to ski, and that I have 4 young children at home. But every time I get the opportunity to either show that video or play that video, I get inspired. I get inspired by the fact that I'm a former retailer turned geek who works for an amazing high-tech company that changes the experiences from a retail perspective. I get inspired by the fact that we're creating smart fabrics for many of the retailers here in the audience. We're creating devices for connected pets. We're creating new wearable devices that actually help your in-store store operations. But before we actually talk a bit about innovation, I want to share a story with you. So I've been coming to this conference for many, many years. And about 4 years ago, there was an Intel executive on stage. And I remember leaning over to our CIO saying, I don't get it. Why is a chip company at a retail conference? And his wisdom, he said to me, Rachel, Intel doesn't sell anything to the retailers. You can't buy anything from them. If they're here, there's a reason. You should probably go figure that out. Well, that curiosity led me to standing on this stage 4 years later after a minor failed stint as a stay-at-home mom. Did not work out so well for me or my kids. But Intel actually works with companies like Levi's who came to us and said, hey, we want to figure out how we have better inventory visibility in store. What can you do to help us? Right? We all know that a 3% increase in inventory visibility will lead to a 1% increase in sales. And what we were actually able to do with Levi's was to get the inventory accuracy in their store to near 100% accurate. Pretty impressive. And that's the innovation. How many of you went to Fashion Week this year? Terry? Yeah. Guess what? Intel was actually at Fashion Week. Who knew? Lots of innovative things are happening. But before we actually talk about what that means to retail, let's take a look at this graph. Yeah, it's kind of a high-tech graph. But all of us in this audience have been hearing that retail is going to change more in the next 5 years than it has in the last 50. And what you can actually see here is that we are at an accelerated pace of innovation. The iPhone was launched in 2007. My 10-year-old son is older than the iPhone. That iPhone changed how we all do retail. Facebook, 2004. Even before that, in 2003, Intel released a chip, and I promise this is going to be the only reference to a chip in this entire speech, that had Wi-Fi in it. And at the time, there were critics who said, why in the world would we need Wi-Fi? How many of you flew in today, yesterday? Did you have Wi-Fi on the plane? How pissed off are you when you don't have Wi-Fi on the plane? Right? It's kind of today's normative services. And I'll tell you, with my 4 young kids at home, I actually have a sticker that says Wi-Fi free zone. And it's not that Wi-Fi is free in my house. When that sticker goes up, that means there's no Wi-Fi. And I'll tell you, it's worse than actually grounding them when we turn the Wi-Fi off on the weekends. That's the kind of innovation that we're in today. Think about autonomous cars. Sounds crazy, but my 4-year-old actually, when I was driving him to school yesterday, suggested that rather than me getting a new car, I should get a Google car, an autonomous driving car so that I can work and take him to school at the same time. Think it's crazy? It's not. Virtual reality. You know, Lowe's is actually doing some pretty cool things using VR. I know it's one of Tom Red's favorite subjects, but it's how retailers are using this technology. Now let's talk a little bit about what that means to you and I. So we are Intel, and we are the company of Moore's Law. Don't worry, I'm not going to stand up here and talk to you guys about engineering laws. But the simplest way to describe this is that as compute goes down in price, the power goes up. In fact, this phone has more power in it than the Apollo 11 had when it put a man on the moon. That's Moore's Law at work. In fact, this phone right now has got 32,600 times faster than the technology of all of NASA combined, not just Apollo 11 back in 1969. So when you think about what it means from a retail perspective, we continue to move up this curve. You know, Terry talked a lot about how he knows his shoppers. Well, the way he's beginning to know his shoppers is by using the data that comes in from his point-of-sale machines, from a lot of the devices that sit in his stores. We are quickly moving up this continuum of change. So we've talked a lot about innovation. We've talked about how technology is really fueling this disruption. But what does it actually mean? So Tom mentioned that I came from retail. I'm actually a fourth-generation retailer. And these pictures here on the screen, 1914, this is my great-grandfather's general store. He actually knew every single customer who walked in the door. He knew what they wanted. He knew what size they were. He knew the assortment that he needed for the seasons. Now you move into 1957, my grandfather's store. Same concept. They knew what they wanted. And we were starting to get to the big box retail here. And I remember as a teenager growing up, my father had the same thing. He knew who his customers were. He knew what they wanted. In fact, when the oranges would come in, he would offer same-day delivery to Mrs. Bogner down the street. And I, as his daughter, had to get on the 10-speed bike. And have you ever tried to put a crate of oranges on a 10-speed bike to deliver same-day delivery, same hour? It's not exactly easy. But in today's retail, what we've actually been able to do with technology and with a lot of the change and the innovation is we've been able to go back to the future. We can now walk into a Nordstrom or into a Macy's. Terry knows who you are. He knows what you like. You know, Sarah talked about shoes drive the dress. There are retailers out there who know when you walk into the store that if you show them this particular pair of shoes, it will actually drive that incremental sale. So with technology, we're really able to take that perfect personalized shopping experience that we so craved in the early days of retail and combine it with the mass efficiency and the innovation that's coming today. So we've heard a lot this morning around the innovation that a lot of retailers are actually doing. We've also heard how certain companies out there have figured out that the unlock is to move from a store to a place of value. How do you get consumers to come into your store? How do you change the experience? How do you take your head merchant and start to provide them with more data than you've ever provided them before so that they can make smarter, faster, better decisions? Interesting fact. It's said by the year 2020, over 50% of the retailers will no longer be in business. Look around the room. It's a pretty dire fact. How do we actually change that? And what are all of these forces that are pushing us towards that change? So we've heard a lot this morning about the millennials. And yes, the millennials are the largest group out there. They are always connected. They think about things differently. In fact, just the other day, I was in the kitchen with my husband having a rather heated argument about my affinity for Ted Baker and what it's actually doing to his bottom line. My 10-year-old came into the kitchen and actually stated, you know, Mommy, just call eHarmony because they offer a money-back guarantee on all of the relationships that you have, right? This is the way these kids think, and my God, if it was that easy, I'd have a closet full of shoes. But that being said, you know, it's not just about the millennials and what it is that they're doing. It's about other demographics. You know, we heard Sarah talk about, you know, women have got 75% of the purchasing power. In my house, I think my husband would argue it's 100%. Any of you know how much women control from a revenue perspective worldwide last year? Trillions? Guesses? Women controlled $20 trillion worth of revenue spend last year. That's more than the GDP of the US and India combined. We all know that women are our key target demographic, but in the US, they also controlled $4.3 trillion of spend. That's a lot of money for all of us from a retail perspective. But again, it's not just about the millennial mindset. And I know some of you actually argue that millennials is not an age group, it's more of a mindset. And I'm sure some of us in here like to pretend we're a millennial until that next morning and that hangover hits. We realize we're not. But it's also about the changing demographics. In 1960s, the number of women and men who were married between the ages of 18 and 32, over 60%. Today, for those of you who have kids in that age range, I hate to tell you, but the number is in the low 20s. People are waiting longer and longer to get married, and even longer to have children. Again, nothing new here. Everyone in this room knows that it's most influenced by the internet. In 2014, I bet if you asked your merchants what was more important, the number of stars a product got, or the associate. When I walk into a store, I want to know how many other likes I got on Facebook, how many stars a particular product got, but I do want the associate there to service me. I want them to know who I am, and I want them to be connected. Sharing economy. Question is, how does a sharing economy actually relate to retail? How many of you have used Uber? Pretty much the entire audience, right? Just this week, there was a new Uber launched. It's called Chariot for Women. Chariot for Women is actually an Uber-like app that is only going to give rides to women and children. And if you're a boy, you have to be under the age of 12 to actually ride an Uber. Uber's big business, but it's not just Uber that's big business from a sharing economy perspective. How many of you, and I would imagine that most of the university students in the back row have heard of Neighbor Goods or Poshmark? Yeah, I see a bunch of hands back there. So Neighbor Goods, it's an interesting phenomena for retailers. Neighbor Goods has actually decided that rather than having every person on the block have a lawnmower, why not share that lawnmower with your neighbor for no fee? So if I want a lawnmower, I can change the lawnmower for the blender that I have. So it's changing the number of trips that consumers have into retail stores. Question is, how do you start to capitalize on some of these things and advertise differently? Poshmark. It's the opportunity to buy and sell clothes online. But there are some retailers out there who've actually figured out that they can actually post some of their private brands on Poshmark. This particular sharing economy has increased over 700% in the last 12 months, and it's only set to continue. Let's talk a little bit about real estate. And I think this is, again, nothing new here. Terry did a great job this morning talking about how he's taking his existing real estate and figuring out how to add value to it, whether it's a store in a store or creating a different kind of experience. Sarah, from a MasterCard perspective, started to share some of the applications that they have to help you figure out where you should put your next store. There's a lot of small format and pop-up stores that are doing remarkably well. It's a new way to think about retail. So those are all the forces that are actually causing us to think differently. We know this, right? It's not just omni-channel, it's not unified commerce. It's all channels all the time. You know, we heard Walgreens talk about the pack of gum. Very, very relevant story. We want to be able to return our items, even if it is small as a pack of gum, anytime we want and any channel that we want. So how do you compete? It was not too long ago in the 1950s when there was only one advertising mechanism, one screen, and it was the television set in your home. And most of the people in the 1950s had one television set. Today, analysts say that we're living our life across 10 different screens. All the way from our personal computer to our automobile dashboard to the point of sale machine that's in the retailer. Any guesses on the number of hours the average US consumer spends across all 10 screens? Not including my kids. 9.9 hours per day across all of these screens. So as a retailer, how do you capture all of these screens? We actually had a conversation with a company who's actually taking this to another level and working with retailers to say, hey, you know, for me, I knew exactly the color of dress that I wanted for today. And what they've done with this app is they've been able to take all of the inventory and all of the data from retailers, and when I type in, I want a pink dress, it will actually pull all of the retailers within a radius that will have a pink dress. That way, I know as a consumer, I could go here, here, and here, versus always going to the same place that I've always gone. And I'll tell you, when that launches, I'll probably need a divorce lawyer because it'll be a lot easier for me to spend money in your stores. This device, right? I would argue this is your remote control for daily life. You don't believe me? Look at the millennials in the back row who are in prayer position doing this, right? They can text with both hands, with both fingers, without even looking up. All of our generations are using this. You know, I'm not a millennial, although I have the millennial mindset. I can't do both screens, both hands. I have to use a single hand. But we do everything on this device. I look for ads here. It is the new advertising device. Interesting enough, my nephew, several years ago, introduced me to Snapchat. And at the time, I thought Snapchat was really used for not the kind of advertising that I was interested in. Let's put it that way. If you don't know what I mean, talk to a millennial in the back row and they can provide you with some additional context. But what's interesting about this remote control for daily life is that over the Super Bowl, Pepsi, Marriott paid over $1 million for disappearing ads to happen on Snapchat. Consumers are using Snapchat now more than ever. In fact, Gatorade paid over $900,000 to put an Orange Crush filter over Snapchat. Burberry just launched their Snap code. You snap something in their store, and it will actually send you to their story. How many of us are actually using Snapchat for news, for advertising? Pretty telling. You can't come to a retail conference and not talk about Google and Amazon. They have forever changed the face of retail. How many of you in the room actually have an Amazon Prime account? Retailers, do you see that? By the year 2020, it is estimated that over half of US homes will have an Amazon Prime account. Over half of US homes will have an Amazon Prime account. So I want to talk to you about something that I'm coining the Gaffa effect. The Gaffa effect is Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Apple. Those 4 companies have changed retail more than just about anything else. You ask how, right? Look at the number that they spend on R&D. Some of that is actually larger than some of your revenue. But it's not just about the R&D spend that these companies invest in. They invest in it because they believe that technology is going to take retail to the next level. And if they don't invest in it, Jeff Bezos isn't going to figure out whether the drone is actually going to deliver our groceries or not. The same with Facebook, right? We heard from Walgreens and how they're integrating into Facebook. All of that requires R&D to fuel that innovation. Amazon just launched their Style TV earlier this week. Google is now asking retailers to use Google Express as a third-party service. The tagline goes, from your store to your customer's door within an hour. Pretty interesting. Amazon. No matter what you think of Jeff Bezos, he is a formidable competitor to just about every industry. First graph, sales and revenue of Amazon versus a combination of other retail stores. Look at the growth. They are so focused on growth that the market cap has actually larger than Walmart. CPG. How many of you actually buy CPG products in a store? We probably all do, but not at the same rate that we used to. Amazon now is the #1 destination for CPG products. But it's not just about Amazon competing with retailers. It's what Amazon's actually doing to Google. I know many of you still spend millions and millions of dollars with Google on advertising, but Amazon's eating into Google's business too. What this chart actually shows is that people are searching for Amazon products in its own apps now more than most of us search for it on Google. But here's the silver lining. Less than 6% of all retail sales last year were done on e-commerce. But it's estimated by 2020, over 20% of retail sales will be done online. So how do we as retailers actually capitalize on that? How do we actually take some of these ideas and do something different when we go back and start our strategy planning? We've heard a lot about data from Sarah. We've heard a lot about how Walgreens uses its data and some of the partners that they use. And the MD Live app, I don't know where you are, but it's fabulous. I actually used it in Paris while I was hacking up a lung. So it's taking all of that data and figuring out how do you actually market to your consumers differently. What does that mean? So for those of you who aren't sci-fi folks and can't imagine that there's going to be more data in 2020 than there are stars in the sky, let me tell you, in the last 2 years, we've created more data in the last 2 years than we have in the last 50. But as a retailer, how do you actually use that data? What's your IT department doing with the data? How do you get it to your merchants more quickly? How do you get it to store operations more quickly? How do we actually refine that oil? That's where companies like Intel can help. Data security. I had a colleague who actually shared with me that he doesn't much care if his credit card gets hacked. What he cares about is when his customer information gets taken, or when his loyalty card information gets taken, or when his address gets taken. Because when you can start to combine the credit card data with my personal data, you can actually create a new Rachel Mushahwar, which would be terrible for my husband, by the way. But he actually had a tax return filed inappropriately on his behalf because he had all of that data conglomerated together. So it's not just about PCI. It's not just about customer data. It's about protecting the entire consumer. We heard a lot this morning about how Terry is actually rethinking store value and what that actually means to consumers. It's turning the store from a brick and mortar to an experience zone. How do you change that experience? How do you actually compete with Amazon? Right? There's things that Amazon can't do. There's things that Amazon will never be able to do, even though they have opened up one bookstore in Seattle. Right? Genius Bar. How many of you guys have been to the Genius Bar lately? What's the role of the associate there? The role of the associate in the Genius Bar is to service you. It's not necessarily to sell you, although you always tend to walk out of the Apple store with one more device than you thought you needed, but it's because they've serviced you and they've actually connected with you. Products. It's not just about the SKUs anymore, right? You heard Walgreens talk about they're taking their SKUs and combining it with partners to do a SKU plus service. This is actually brilliant from a Home Depot perspective. For those women in the audience, how many times have you actually gone to Home Depot, convinced your spouse or your partner to put together some do-it-yourself project, and it sits in the garage for months? Home Depot's actually figured out that that actually happens a lot. Not sure why, men, but it does. And what they're actually offering is the ability for whatever do-it-yourself project that you want to do, whether it's painting a bedroom or installing new garage cabinets, they'll actually sell you that too. They'll bring that stuff out to your house and do it for you. It's also about new products, right? As retailers, we are always looking for that next innovation in fabric, that next innovation in product. Can't stand up here and talk about innovation without talking about 3D printing. You think it's far out? It's not. New Balance actually has launched shoes with the soles that are 3D printed, thanks to the help of Intel technology. So we talked about these first four earlier on. These are the standard status quo for retailers. But what about the third-party services? Any of you heard of Instacart? Some of you. It's a grocery store delivery service. They're actually going to large grocery stores and saying, you want to do same-day delivery or same hour? We'll actually partner with you to do that. Vending. For those of you who flew into Tucson or have flown through any of the major airports, see where the vending machines are? You've got Best Buy, you've got Sephora. You know, just last week I actually had to buy a pair of ballet flats as I was running through the Munich airport, and I guarantee you the margin on those ballet flats was ridiculous. But it's an exploding area, especially in Asia. Fourth channel. We haven't talked about the fourth channel. I haven't heard anyone talk about the fourth channel yet. This is an area that is new. Just last year, Amazon launched their Amazon Dash button. We'll talk about that in a second, but a French retailer also decided that rather than just launching a SKU-based button, they were going to launch a services-based button. It's actually pretty innovative. You press the button in your house, and for a small fee, Anyone from Darty, which is equivalent to a Best Buy combination Home Depot retailer here in the US, will help you with your TV, will help you with your microwave, will tell you how to work your stupid remote control, any of those things. Any idea how many associates Uber has? 160,000 associates. 4,000 of them are full-time. That's a pretty darn good labor model. They know that labor is the most expensive thing, so they've actually gone to labor as a service. In the year 2020, almost 70% of our workforce is going to be millennials. And I just heard a stat that for those of us who are thinking about retirement, the average age for retirement now is 72. That's really depressing for someone like me. But what does that mean for our labor models? And how do we actually change that labor model to the demographic? How do we start to use companies like Uber or Chariot for Women to start to deliver goods and services? You know, Uber in the San Francisco area and some of the major cities is actually using it to deliver fast food. So Sarah, for your daughter who doesn't cook, she can now use Uber to actually get the food delivered to her house so she doesn't even have to go out. Let's talk a little bit about the fourth channel. Just this month, Amazon launched another 100 dash buttons. And in that time, they have seen weekly orders increase by almost 75%. 1,400 orders a minute using a dash button. A year ago, I couldn't imagine why would we actually need a dash button. But my nephew called me last week, who's a senior at Emory, and was thrilled that Amazon actually launched a Trojan dash button. I had to explain to him that it was same-day delivery, not same-hour delivery. And while it's pretty innovative, it has time to get there for things like Trojan. Any of you have a dash button in your home? A couple. It'll be interesting when we ask that question again in 3 years. 1,400 orders per minute on a dash button. So we've talked about a lot of different things. We've talked about the forces that are driving retailers. We've talked about how we actually do a mashup of the physical stores with the digital stores. But it's really about what's going to emerge next and how do we respond to it. Right? HP was invented in a garage. The first Apple computer, 1976. Any guesses when the first YouTube video launched? My kids can't imagine life without YouTube, by the way. 2005. It's been around for a little over 10 years. Think of all the advertising and how much we spend on YouTube. You know, at Intel, we don't know what's going to happen next, but we certainly do spend a lot of money on R&D and innovation, and working with companies like Tag Heuer, working with companies like Macy's, working with companies like Luxottica to figure out how we stay ahead of the curve and how technology will actually help them. But it's not about what will emerge next. It's not about that science project or that bright, shiny object. It's really about what you as executives in this room are going to choose to do next. Whether you're JDA or SAP or a retailer, how are you going to rethink your marketing dollars this year? What about your store experience? Product assortment has always been the age-old cornerstone from a retail perspective. But is it products plus services? Supply chain, right? How smart is your supply chain? We've talked about the fourth channel. We've talked about third-party services. What about preventative maintenance inside of your supply chain? What if we could predict when your forklift is going to fail? From a transportation perspective, think about the advances of technology that are here today. I can actually tell you how fast your drivers are driving their trucks. And we all know, based on the speed limit that that driver is driving, what it does to the wear and tear of his vehicle. We also know what it does to our insurance costs when they're driving too quickly. How do you start to take that data and make better decisions with it? And at Intel, right, we think that innovation is everything. And the reason that the retail group at Intel exists is to help retailers try to figure out how to tackle their next big thing. I talked a little bit about the wearables that we're working on with a variety of large retailers. We're also looking at connected pet, connected leashes, connected bowls. I know there's a huge contingent from my alma mater in the audience. It's big business. But as a retailer, you've got to figure out how do you actually stay on that edge? What are you going to do next? What does your strat planning look like this summer? And with that, I'm going to pause and ask the audience for any questions. And I'm getting older, so my eyesight is quite bad. I can't see anything.
I don't think I need microphones. At Durban with VMware, my question is, as consumers today, everybody's walking around with a device. They walk in the store, they know more about the product than the sales associate. Why don't we see more of the sales associates holding on to the device to give them a fair chance to know just as much as the consumer walking in the door?
We would love to see devices in every hand. Tablets, by the way. I think it's a great question. I think a lot of it has to do with what's the role of the associate, and do you need every associate in the store holding a tablet, or do you need some associates with a wearable device on their wrist, right? So I think it's about rethinking traditional retail. It's about rethinking tablets in store are absolutely fundamental, but so are wearables. Whether it's a headset, whether it's an arm piece, right? How do I start to do something as basic as tell my associates that I have a pair of jeans that are sitting in the fitting room and there's a customer on aisle 4 who actually wants them, and trigger that through a software company like JDA to actually send that associate to go pick up those pair of pants onto a wearable device. That's the type of innovation that retailers are starting to think about. Next question. I know I'm the only person between you and lunch, but it's like 90 degrees outside. Yes, I see a hand, I think. The question was, what's the opinion on Chatbox, and will it take off as a good customer service tool? I can't answer specifically about Chatbox, but I can say that retailers are getting to the point where they know that having that customer service when you want it, where you want it, and how you want it is absolutely fundamental. Right? I didn't actually know from a Walgreens perspective I could talk with a pharmacist 24 hours a day. That's brilliant. Whether it's on Chatbox or it's on some other multimedia app, yes. Any other questions? All right, with that, let's play our last video. And thank you so much. Have a great conference.